Welcome to the Think Generational Wealth Podcast, and this is episode number 122. I am your host, Amir Estimo. Thank you for tuning in to today's podcast episode because you could be doing anything in this world. The fact that you listening to this podcast episode is much appreciated. And I hope today's episode is much value to you because we're going to talk about land. And I'm going to actually walk you through a case study of my first property that I bought, a land property that I bought. So if anybody's ever interested that listens to this podcast, not sure wherever you are, but if you are here in the States, you are interested in buying land, this could be something you can look into. So let's get started. Anyway, so today's podcast, again, we're going to talk about land. Now, let's get started. So now, if any of you guys know about land or anybody know about real estate, there's different types of assets in real estate. There's obviously home, there's multifamily, there's land, there's self-storage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So not land, but real estate has made more millionaires than we can even count. And it's a very good niche to get into, but you have to know what you're doing. Now, the reason I chose land was I started off in housing. I bought a course, looked into it was I can't remember the company. It was Tom Corral. I hope I said his name right, but wholesaling for houses, I think. I bought the course. It was okay. It was nothing that you probably couldn't see on the internet. That it did some research, but with houses, what I came to find out is I didn't because houses has a emotional attachment to it. When you're trying to buy a property from someone, especially when it's a house, the thing is that they could have raised their kids in that home. That could have been their first home, etc. So now when they have to eventually sell this home for whatever reason, there's an emotional attachment to it. And then the fact that it depends on what process did you want to go with, an active or passive investor. Now, the difference between the two is if you're active, meaning that to use an example, that means with houses, right? You are known as a flipper. A flipper would buy the home very cheap, needs a lot of work. I wouldn't say very cheap to a certain degree, depending on market. Meaning they would buy that below market value because the home may need a lot of work, depending maybe bathroom, etc. done. Then you take that, you remodel it, you put whatever money it takes to remodel a home to bring it up to market value, and then you turn around and sell it. So that's considered an active investor, meaning that all your money is pretty much transactional. Whereas if you buy a home, you can do the same thing, remodel it, but you may turn around and rent it out to someone else. The thing about it though, unless you buy the home cash, most investors in this space use a bank financing to close on the deal. Now, if they're using the bank financing, you're going to have a mortgage on the property. So that means you can probably charge someone, let's say, have a mortgage of $1,000, then you charge rent $1,500. But what you have to consider is if you are not self-managing the property yourself, you're probably using a property management company, which is going to charge you a fee every month. So let's say that fee is, for example, $100, especially in today's economy. Then you have to take into account if you're not the one who's coming in again, cutting the grass, that could be another 20 or $30, whatever that is. So you can end that $50, that $500 that you would have made probably can end up being like $350 a month extra for you. And then you have to take into account, you have to put that money into a reserve account because if anything breaks down at that home, depending on what state you are, if anything breaks down, and also how did you have it set up when you initially rented the home to the person, then what's going to happen is that comes out of your cost. So if you don't have a reserve account, then people are just going to, this stuff is going to have to come out of your pocket to fix. So you got to keep that in mind too. But you know, you're every month you're going to get $350, whatever that is. Now with land, it works the same way, but the difference with land is you can be known as a flipper. So if you are known as a flipper in land, that means you buy the property again you buy it at a discount. Then you really don't. There's really not much value add unless you're going in there. Depending on where the property is located, do you buy it? Do you maybe clear it? Do some clearing on the property? Maybe let's say the property may have some title issues. Maybe actually get a survey done on the property. So there's those type of value adds you can do with land. Then you can turn around and sell it to an end buyer. Whereas with land, you can also be known as a passive investor. I mean, you can buy the property outright. Maybe let's say $2,000-3,000, and let's say 1 acre. I'm just throwing numbers out. This is not actual numbers. And then you can charge 40, $50 a month, $100 a month, and then every single month you're gonna get $100 a month. The drawback with that is, since it's not really a big expense, if someone turns around and says, hey, I don't want to, they don't pay whatever, you don't have a system set up, and let's say that person doesn't pay, now, okay, you lose that $100. But the good thing about it, because depending on how you set the deal, you may say, okay, such and such, you haven't paid, when you finish pay for this property, then I'll give you the deed. And if you have it set up like that, and let's say you were doing some type of setup to that extent, to that setup, then what you can do is foreclose on the property and take your property back. So I don't want to get too much into that part of it, but I'm just giving you a gist of what's an active versus passive investor and how it works in land also. Now, this property I bought was 7.54 acres. The property was located in Yancey County, North Carolina. So I'm not sure how many people is familiar with North Carolina, but it was in Yancey County, North Carolina. I got this property through mailers. So what I would use is a mail house company. The company, what I would do is I'll buy a data from some company. It could be like Data Tree, Price. These are the popular ones. And then scrub the list. Obviously, do not mail. So I remove everybody who doesn't want to be mailed. Send out a mass mail in that particular area, and then see if anybody's interested in selling their property. The thing about mailers is, especially back in the days when I did it, now is very expensive. I haven't mailed almost a year. It's been a while. Last time I mailed, I did a test for like 1,000. I spent like $1,000, and then I didn't get barely any response. And then what was happening too was people were, oh man, this property is not worth, back in the days, someone, okay, yeah, I'll sell a property. Now people has actually gotten smarter. So what's happening, especially in this space, a lot of people are mass mailing, and they're just buying data and just sending it. And they're sending offers, and they're really below market value. So people are coming in and saying, okay, well, you may send a mailer for 1 acre, $4,000. Someone's coming back and saying, oh no, I want 20K for it. And, I was getting barely any response. So I actually shut down the whole mailing completely. And now I'm pivoting to something else, which I'll share with you guys on a later podcast. Now, I bought this property, 7.45 acres. I bought it for actually $18,200. Now, when I first initially bought the property, I didn't buy the property until 6 months later. And the reason I was doing that was because when I got it under contract, so you do what they call a purchase agreement, meaning that between you and the seller, on this date, you are going to execute, let's say 6 months from now, you're going to execute, it could be 3 months, it depends on however you want it set up. You're going to execute on this deal and you're going to buy this property. I put it out in the market originally, and I got a lot of feedback. Some people liked it, some people don't. The issue with the property was it was number one, the property was steep. So in this area, most properties in this area, okay, so going back, so the seller who sold it to me, eventually they sold it to me, and the reason they sold it because the wife needs extra money because the husband actually owned more acres in that area and just was kind of selling off his assets. He's getting old, so he just needed some of the money. The Again, going back, so I had the property, and then I bought the property, but it was 6 months later. And the reason I actually ended up closing on this property because I wanted to keep my word. I didn't want to be a wholesaler. I wanted to actually be an investor. So I got some feedback. Some people said it was good. Some people said it wasn't. But I knew in my heart, I knew the property can sell. I know I can sell the property because I remember listening to a gentleman on a TikTok, and he says all properties, all land sells, which is true. Because I'm gonna do 3 more case studies of properties I sold, and I'll give you guys, and I actually might do a YouTube video too, so you can actually see a visualization for some of you guys who may be visual learners like me. Now the property, again, I bought it for 18.2. So after taxes and all, closing costs, it was probably like another 1,500. So basically I was all in for 19.7. I bought the property. It was actually a property I owned in North Carolina. And I was thinking, I was like, man, should I kept it or not? I wasn't real sure, but I was like, you know what? At least let me close the deal with the sellers because I want to execute. I didn't want to wholesale. So if any of you guys don't know what wholesaling is when you buy let's say again in real estate, you find a discount, you find a property, but you actually may not have the money to close on the property. So what you do is you find an end buyer and you assign them a fee because as a wholesaler, you probably the one who did all the brunt work, and then you send it to an end buyer. The end buyer then buys it for you. They're actually the one who closed on the deal, not you, but they send you a fee. The issue now with wholesaling is that a lot of people have done it so wrong and unethical that now most states or some states are starting to require that you actually have a license to be facilitate a real estate transaction. So now that's the issue now with wholesaling, and now it gets a bad name because you have a lot of unethical people who are doing it. And on top of that, they may say, hey, I'm going to buy the property, and they never do. And if it's a bad deal, they just walk away, and then they leave the seller hanging. So some states in the US are requiring you to actually have a license to actually facilitate a real estate transaction. But what I did with this deal, I was not a wholesaler. I did not want to go a wholesaling route. If I closed on a deal, I would actually double close, meaning that I would still buy the property, but I would align the seller in buyer transaction one day. So I would buy let's say in the morning, I buy the property from the seller. The property, the deed gets transferred in my company's name, the LLC. Then the LLC owns the property. Then we turn around the same day and sell it to an end buyer. So there's no fee involved. I'm actually the one closing on the deal. And if you ever decide you want to get into real estate, get away from wholesaling. Look at doing private, like maybe find a private lender, transactional funding. There's other ways you can do it than just being unethical. Now, when I went about this deal, I bought it in May of 22. It took me over a year. Now, the property was steep. The good thing about the property was it was not in wetlands. It was not in wetlands. It was actually in a nice quiet area, which was a getaway area. And the only reason I knew about that because there was a realtor I actually asked this information to, and the realtor said, yeah, it's a getaway area. So if you wanted to just go out in the country, wanted to put a cabin on this property, and you can actually do it's a good, nice little getaway. The drawback of the property was There was actually kind of a creek in front of the property, a small little creek, and the access, it was accessible, but it was kind of difficult at the same time to get to the property. So a lot of people that turned a lot of people off. But with the thing about with land versus houses, four bathroom. I mean, sorry, a 4 bedroom, 3 bathroom house. It is, you put it on the market. There's not really a specific buyer needed for it. For a someone like with land, it has to be a specific buyer. Not everyone that buys. Some people may buy vacant land inside the city. Some people may buy property outside the city. Some people may buy properties that are landlocked. Some people may buy properties that are wetlands. So you have to find a specific buyer. With this property, I had to find a specific buyer. So from the time I bought it in May of 22nd of 22, what I did was I waited because the property was on the market, and I actually did what they call broker listing. So as long as you have a purchase agreement between you and the seller, you can find a company that can actually put it on the MLS. You pay them a fee. They can actually put the property on the MLS for you. The property was on there for 6 months again. I listed the property for $75K. That was the beginning. I think that's what it was. Maybe like every 2 months, I kept lowering the price. Again, it was barely any transaction. Not to say there was not no looks. It's just that it was just taking longer than expected to find the right buyer. So I ended up closing on the property. Then I took the property off the MLS for a while. And then I waited about maybe, I would say I waited about 5 to 6 months, and then I put it back on the MLS again. But since I knew this was a property I owned, I didn't have a problem really waiting. Now, what I did was once I put it back on there, and it was like later in the year, from that time, what people don't tell you is if they said, well, I made $30,000. Well, you have to ask, well, what was your marketing cost? How much time it take you to market on this property? Because you got to consider you're talking to buyers, and you can have a conversation with a buyer 10 minutes, 2 to 3 buyers a day. And each conversation could be, let's say, 10 minutes, and that's 30 minutes. You got to count that. Now, minus the weekends. I never took calls on the weekends, but it could be somebody texting you. You got to consider that. You got to consider, I don't know how many times I listed on the Facebook Marketplace. I listed it in this, I used to use a website called land.com. I did a subscription through that company. So you got to understand how much marketing cost it took for you to sell this property. And then on top of it, the taxes. So if you pay, in this case, since I already owned the property, well, not have to, but I already owned the property. So my tax was very minimal. So all in all, I made like 10K. At the end of the day, I made 10K on the property after taxes. Considering you got to consider the taxes you paid for to buy the property, and then maybe the small taxes on the other end, and then the marketing costs. So I ended up making $10,000 on this deal. It took me a year, and I think the return on investment was like 30% or something like that. I don't remember, but again, I end up selling it for 32,000. But again, the issue, actually, sorry, 30,000. The issue was it was very steep, so not all of the property was buildable. Again, you had to find a specific buyer for this property. So a 7.45 acre property may have actually end up being it could have been like, if you don't have a lot of buildable areas to it, it probably was like 2 to 3 acres of it that was buildable. And the access was an issue. It was steep. So those were the two things that turned people off on this property. So that's why it took me so long to sell it. But because it was my first transaction and I really wanted to learn, I wanted to take a property from A to Z. I wanted to take it from start to beginning. Because if this was something I was going to build a business, you got to know how it works. So I ended up making $10,000 at the end of the day. The buyer I ended up finding was he just wanted to own some. He had some invest. He had some extra cash, and he knew about the area, so he was okay with that. And he just basically wanted to park his money there. And he knew that maybe it's an area that's going to eventually grow. So this was a long-term hold. This was a buy and hold for him. The thing about taxes on land, it's not really that expensive for the most part. A couple of $100 a year. And if you wanted to, you can do some value add to the property. Again, like I stated before, maybe add a survey, get a survey done. So there's actually boundary lines to see how much of the property you can do you can clear the property. So if the property, let's say there's trees and stuff on the property, you can pay a company to go out there and clear it out. So you do some value adds that actually that can, so if an end buyer buys they will pay more for it because those things are already done. Now, and a good thing too with the property was there was actually electricity in the area. So so if someone bought it, they had access to electricity. So if they wanted to build, it was not like they had to get it installed. If you, and another value add could be that you add a septic tank. So let's say you want to add as well a septic tank. Let's say you get the soil tested to see where you can, if can it take a well or septic tank. So those things you can do as a value add for land. But like I said, I ended up making 10K off this property because the property had some issues, but the fact that you had to find a specific buyer that knows that, okay, hey, this is my objective, this is what I'm going to do, and I end up closing on the property. So I wanted to share with you guys in case anybody ever decides they want to get into land. It's a good space to get into, but right now it's oversaturated. And if you do get into it, don't go in it without not knowing what to do. Because the thing about land is when you buy a property, you got to know why you buy it for. Is there restrictions on the property? What can you build on the property? What can you and cannot do on the property? So there are things you would have to look into to ensure. And then, is it an area? Is it a good area? Is it a getaway area? Is it an area that is, there's a lot of traffic in the area? So these are things you want to consider if you ever buy land. And maybe you not buy land to really as a business. Maybe you just want to own some land. But again, these are things you have to look into before you do it. Okay, hopefully that helps. This was my first deal. I'm gonna walk you through another deal. I actually sold a property that was landlocked, wetlands, and I actually sold another property. So, like in 2024, the first deal, 22, I bought it. I ended up selling it at the end of 23, and then in 24, I ended up buying and selling like 5 to 6 properties that I end up doing business. I end up selling. So this year, I actually had to pivot. I haven't sold any land or bought any this year because I really had to pivot this year and what I really wanted to do because I didn't want to keep on mailing. I really don't have time to cold call because there's different ways you can do. You can cold call, you can text, you can do ringless voicemails. I would not suggest doing that. Mailing is probably going to be your best bet because you want to be careful, but mailers is very expensive too. If you have time, maybe look into cold calling, but at the same time, the thing about cold calling is you're going to run these people. Generally, you're calling someone out the blue and they may not really have an urgency to really sell the property to you. And when you do, it's a lot of tire kickers. You're just throwing numbers out there just to get you off the phone. So those are things you want to consider. If you want to be if you want to be a land investor, you actually want to do it right. You actually want to know what you're doing, and you actually want to make sure that you are going to perform. Don't be a wholesaler. Be an investor. Okay? Thank you for tuning in to today's podcast episode. I hope you listen to this all the way to the end. And my name is Amir Estimo. And see you next week. Peace. Much love.